to pull up our website now.
Okay, I have Meg Jordan, Associate Director of Competitive Sports at UMass Lowell. We're going to talk some non-NCAA intercollegiate club sports, what's going on generally, and what's up at UMass Lowell. So anyway, back to what we're talking about at UMass Lowell. Um, can you describe like how the administration of on-campus intramurals and health and wellness programs and intercollegiate club sports work? Are they all under one umbrella? And like, what's your role in all of that?
Sure. So we all are within campus recreation. At my school, we're under student affairs. I know some campus rec programs are under athletics. We do have an intramural program, which is mainly coordinated from our assistant director of intramural sports. The students, there are student officials, but it's really run by the assistant director. I think you mentioned group fit. Was that the other one, or fitness?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, that's the other assistant director. They again coordinate most of those programs, but the classes are taught by students. Our physical or personal trainers are students. Club sports is a bit unique. We do have myself and our assistant director of club sports as administrators, but club sports are really student run interest groups. And so we're just there to support. If you think about it, there's only two of us, and we're a little bit like an athletic department, right? So most of the responsibilities are delegated to the clubs.
So this is what I'm interested in. I think, and
Mm-hmm.
that's like the traditional model, and it still
Mm-hmm.
is probably 80%, like if not more, of
Mm-hmm.
like the model of most colleges is that the clubs they're sort of student driven and they get
Mm-hmm.
some assistance from folks like yourself and campus rec department. But what's interesting to me and like one of the interviews that I had on Zoom. I don't know if you guys see it, but like with it was with Liberty University in Virginia, and um, those guys like are sort of changing the ball game a little bit, and there's other schools that are doing it, and it's not it wasn't necessarily for marketing purposes or for like prestige. It kind of started out as like a liability issue. So
Mm-hmm.
they actually had a club lacrosse team. I think it was like the 80s, and kids were they had to drive themselves, and they're wearing Liberty, they're representing the school, but they're
Right.
crossing state lines. Well, like the deal was some kid got in a car accident, so
Yeah.
like I mean, and it might have been like fatal, I forget. But anyway, that was the minute that they were kind of like, okay, we need to like take this over, like
Yeah.
so it was more. It wasn't really about like making it look like NCAA. That wasn't like the initial thought. It was more like a liability thing. But then that's sort of where it went.
Right.
And so like your model, it's funny because like even some of the super huge universities, and I spoke with the direct, basically you at University of Michigan, and they don't do anything different than you. Um, but
Right.
then Liberty and a few others, especially that are NCAA D2 schools, have made this conscious decision to basically create like a second athletic department and pull
Mm-hmm.
away their intercollegiate club sports, the teams that play off campus, put it that way, but that aren't
Mm-hmm.
NCAA, and make like almost like a Division 3 athletic department below the Division 1 athletic department, if that makes sense.
It
And
does.
it goes even so far, like at Liberty, and they're it started out with liability thing, but now they became aware that like these teams kind of do have a little bit of following, so they have consciously decided to not redundantly have a team. So if they're a Division 1 school, if they have a NCAA, which they do, like a NCAA baseball team, they will not field an intercollegiate club team.
Mm.
They'll have on campus rec club team, like intramural, but they will
Yeah.
not have like a club team. And vice versa. If they have a club team that's intercollegiate, they don't have it at the NCAA
Mm.
level. So it's a conscious decision. So when you ask them how many teams they have on campus, they'll be like 54 or whatever, like, but they're just saying like we have 54 intercollegiate club teams, whether they're NCAA or not.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
it's kind of like a new thing. So yeah, so like their men's hockey team, and what it does is like their club teams, that's the only game in town. Like they're not, it's not like the club, baseball team at some school, fill in the blank, who has a team at the NCAA level where you're like second fiddle or third fiddle. Like nobody's coming out to watch the
Hmm.
club team if you have a NCAA team. But if that's the only game in town, like that's
Right.
that's a draw, right? And so
Right.
they've
Right.
and it's not just men's sports, like that's all their men's and women's.
Hmm.
So anyway, that model is like becoming a thing, and I'm sort of
Hmm.
interested in places that are doing that and why.
Hmm.
But you guys are still like that. The traditional model that you have, like, is still predominant for
Hmm.
sure, from what I can see.
I do feel like, and I actually read an article about this maybe a year ago now, but part of it is just resources, like you mentioned, in the budget. And another part of it is students may play sports in high school and not want to commit to, you and I know it's like a huge part-time job on the side of being a full-time student, right?
Yeah,
So a student might actually be more privy to join a club team. And schools might, understand, okay, we can still offer the sport to these students, still drive in recruitment and retention in that way, but it's going to cost us, 10% of what an NCAA team would cost, not even like 5%. We haven't, had conversations about that. We have had our crew team was NCAA and moved down to club.
women, obviously.
Nope. Well, it was both actually. I think it was women NCAA, but now it's both.
Well, yeah,
Um,
crew is tough to like the language of it because there is NCAA women's crew, but there isn't NCAA men's crew. But then there's schools that consider their men's crew teams varsity, i.e., they fund it and manage it through their athletic department.
oh,
So like Harvard men's crew is a varsity team. Like
yeah.
it's run through the athletic department, but there's no NCAA men's crew.
I don't
It's
know that I knew that. Wow, that's
yeah.
interesting.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah. So it's like
Um,
it's a semantics thing. Well, and
yeah.
that's kind of where this is going. So now just like the men's crew, you know, men's crew like goes back to like the beginning of time. I mean, like that is the origins of college sports. I mean, Harvard
Hmm.
and Yale having a crew match or excuse me, race on Lake Winnipesaukee pre-Civil War. Um,
Right.
that like predates football, American football.
Mhm.
And so like that club model of that like varsity, like NCAA, like the NCAA's origins are football related. It
Okay.
was regulating football like before World War One because they were paying players and also like injury
Mhm.
issues. Like
Mhm.
the Teddy Roosevelt administration was like cracking it. So like all the NCAA, like all of it, the beginnings of it were football related.
Okay.
So like crew like always did its own thing. But yeah, so like so some of these teams, some of these programs, like they're kind of following suit with what like Ivy League men's crew does is they're supporting it, but they're just not becoming an NCAA program
Right.
by choice in
Mhm.
some cases. And like you said, like I mean, club, I think that moniker, like, yeah, there's some less like the whole like seriousness or like commitment level, but like in some cases that's not necessarily, I mean, well, Michigan's men's rowing is not a varsity program. They are club, if you will. But meanwhile they've had like four Olympians on that team.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, and then some of these other sports, and again, hockey, men's lacrosse. I mean, it's getting to the point where there's so much talent floating around out there for fewer and fewer NCAA spots, especially
Mhm.
in certain sports like hockey or lacrosse, where it's not a universal sport,
Mhm.
that it looks and feels more and more like an NCAA team, you know?
Mhm.
So, and it's just the market, just like, when Texas has 100 guys or 150 guys come out, or it wouldn't be the women's team because they're NCAA, but the men's club, like with that sheer numbers, like you can't just walk onto the team,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
So, but there are still things that are, less intense. But even the things that quote unquote aren't like that intense have become intense. So, again, on Saturday morning when you turn on ESPN before college game day football, and it's like college cornhole sponsored by Johnsonville Brats, and it's
Yeah.
University of Wisconsin versus Iowa or whatever, right? Like, I mean, there's money on the line, and then or college bass fishing, and there's like real money on the line, and it's on ESPN. You're like, holy cow, this is not like this is now. It's not like just kids organizing themselves. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
Um, the bass fishing thing was interesting. Last year's big article in Wall Street Journal about bass fishing, and they use as an anecdote Auburn University. Auburn's what, Alabama, Georgia? I think it's Alabama. Um, and they don't get really any funding, if any funding, from like basically their campus rec department. And
Hmm.
the article went into this. However, um, there is prize money, and it's organized by
Hmm.
Bass Pro or one of the big manufacturers, and they're allowed to keep it.
Oh,
So this Auburn bass fishing team's like 7 or 8 guys. They get no money from the university, but they raked in $1 million
wow.
in prize money. Never mind like
Yep.
third party sponsorship stuff. So,
Wow.
you have the boat manufacturers and Cabela's and Bass
Hmm.
Pro and yada yada,
Yeah.
you know. So like there's all this money from the outside coming in, and it's
Hmm.
not even coming from the school. All they're just using the name of the school, which is
Wow.
like a whole nother piece too. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. But I was looking at the list of like the teams that you all field intercollegiate club sports. So like talk to me about like which one of these, like which are the most like institutionalized and have a little history behind them and support.
So the first ones that came to mind when you asked our rugby teams, especially our men's rugby team, that's also one of our larger teams right now. They can have a roster anywhere between 40 to 50, 60 guys. They do actually play, oh my gosh, the team name is skipping me right now, but they do play a D1 institution, and it's a D1 sport there. So that's interesting, right? To your point earlier, is that we're competing against these schools that are an athletic program.
Right.
Yeah. Our dance team has also been around for quite some time, cheerleading. A lot of the traditional sports I feel like have the most history with them. But we almost classify all of our sports in three buckets of competitive sports. Those are a lot of your traditional sports, the soccers, the rugbies, tennis. And then we have recreational sports. Those are like our badmintons and table tennis, where they might compete in a couple series, but really it's just the students playing amongst themselves. And then we do have the dance groups under us as well. So there's like breakers and proto hype and what's another one? We had ballroom at one point. The more institutionalized ones, like you said, I do feel like our efforts are geared more towards them and assisting with coordinating field space and officials and things like that. But there's two of us, right? So the students are doing a lot of that legwork. We're kind of tying it off in the end. But the performance sports, those really are self-run. Of course, there's resources from us if they need it. We, to your very earlier point about the risk management aspect, almost anything that a club has to do, whether they're purchasing something, traveling somewhere, having a home game, it has to go through us though. We have forms for all of this on IM leagues. I'm sure you're familiar with IM leagues. Everything has to be approved. We take down license information. We go through safe driving courses. So it's delegated. It's not, we're not doing it directly, but we do have a lot of those fail safes in place.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that's interested me is like kind of like the crew thing. Um, how many sports are Olympic sports that are not NCAA sports? And
Mm.
those happen to be a lot of them sort of serious. So even on your own list, badminton is an Olympic sport, jujitsu
Mhm.
is an Olympic sport, equestrian is an Olympic sport, climbing, powerlifting, table tennis, and I think that's all on here. But all those are Olympic sport, and none of them are an NCAA sport. So some of
Interesting.
the yeah, right. So I mean, you can rip off more. I mean, cycling, triathlon,
Right.
you know. well, actually, figure skating, I forgot you have that too. Um, so like there's a lot of things that have sort of become serious because that's the only game in town. There is no
Right.
NCAA
Right.
boxing, whatever. And then you have these other activities, kind of like does your department handle esports or no? Or do you have
Um,
esports?
we are on the tipping point of having an esports program run through student affairs, so not through us. They kept trying to move it towards us, and
Okay.
we delayed that, but we will have it soon.
Well, and here's another one that's cutting edge that I'm fascinated by is pickleball. Like, have you
Yep.
gotten into that game yet or no?
Oh yes. Oh, well, that game found me, I guess. But our
Playing it
memberships
yourself
have
or
a little bit, but
yeah.
our memberships have skyrocketed. And so I've said pickleball more in the past 2 to 3 years than my entire life, obviously. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely catching fire. We just created a new pickleball club, student club, maybe a month ago, 2 months ago now.
So is that all on campus? Or are they doing it
Yes.
intercollegiately yet? Okay.
They've done some tournaments, but I think those have been more like open ended. I think there's, general players in that too.
Okay.
Hmm.
The other one that I was really interested in, again, one of the besides the sports that are not NCAA sports are the programs. Sorry if I like I think this runs out. So like if I lose you, I lose you. Oh no, here it is, 5 minutes. Um, so I'll cut it off. But the sports that are interesting to me are NCAA sports that are not universal, um, but at certain schools that don't have them, that's where the club fills the bill, right? So like
Hmm. Yep.
women's hockey or whatever. And UMass Lowell is one of those schools that has a men's hockey team, but does not have an NCAA women's hockey team.
Hmm.
And in many respects, at least, and this is kind of changing because back to what I was saying about like schools sort of taking the reins. Um,
Hmm.
a few years ago, all the best teams in men and women were schools that didn't have an NCAA team. So UMass Amherst women's hockey team, they were one of the better clubs
Hmm.
because they're the only game in town,
Right.
and they have a men's team and they get to use the Mullen Center. Um, but they've kind of been bypassed by a bunch of schools, primarily in the Midwest, that are now like the men's rowing thing, that are
Hmm.
sponsored, that are administering their club hockey teams through athletics, even though they're
Hmm.
playing non-NCAA. So it's kind of interesting. And like Lowell, I was like, where is UMass Lowell in this whole mix? How have I not seen the women's hockey program there? And then like I stumbled upon the league that they played in. I had never even heard of it. And like I consider myself like pretty the IWCHL. Um, it's kind of like this small New England league, which is kind of interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because
They
the
moved
Nash
leagues recently too.
say again.
They moved leagues. They were in a different league maybe 2 years ago. Or maybe they merged actually. It might have been a merge.
So that's another thing that's interesting about like the club sports is that like, and I don't know how much you deal, probably not much with your model, but like the governing bodies for a lot of this is running through the governing body for that sport. So like
Mhm.
college archery, which is a thing. It's not an NCAA sport, but USA
Mhm.
Archery manages collegiate archery, and then US Cycling does the same thing for like collegiate cycling. However, sports that have a presence in NCAA, that doesn't seem to be the case. So United States Soccer Federation is not handling non-NCAA. So NERSA, like, are you
Mhm.
guys part of NERSA?
We are.
Yeah, so like soccer, NERSA soccer seems to be becoming like a thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yep, flag
especially
football,
yeah.
basketball. Yeah.
But again, like that NERSA men's soccer tournament, like you just go through all the teams that are in the tournament in Texas or
Yeah.
whatever. And like I said, they're all the schools that don't have an NCAA team. And it's like shocker,
Hmm.
they're all the best
Hmm.
ones because that's the only game in town.
Right.
So that's kind of an interesting little piece. But yeah, so like women's hockey. at UMass Lowell, like I'm interested in like following that program and seeing sort of what the trajectory of that is. Because a lot of times the teams that don't have parity like are usually the better ones. And there's
Mhm.
still for hockey, there's still a lack of parity, especially in the Midwest. Not so much in New England, but like the Midwest, Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, Bowling Green, Miami. None of them have a women's team, but they all have a men's team.
Mhm.
However, all of them have a women's figure skating team. Um,
Okay.
using that, and you guys do too, right?
Uh, Ice Hawks are unique. They're almost like an on ice cheerleading group, but there's like a subgroup of them that do figure skating. So there's maybe 4 or 5 of them out of the group of like 15 to 20 that actually do figure skating.
Okay, like synchro.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Um, so anyway, I think I'm gonna lose you in like 1 minute. So maybe I'll do is I'll end it here
I,
so that you can.
I also, I apologize for being late. So if there's further questions that you even want to email me, I'm more than
Yeah.
happy to answer those just in print.
Yeah, no, I will. Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate hearing from you. And like, yeah, like there's definitely more things that I'm interested in hearing about, like climbing, powerlifting, and then anything else that's on the horizon, like
Mhm.
what you're hearing from students about what they're interested in, sort of adding like whether pickleball's like the next big thing or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Meg. Appreciate it. Now, we'll
Of
definitely
course.
stay in touch. And I'll
Yeah, I was
see.
going to say open door. So whether you want to shoot me a call or send me an email, happy to stay connected.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah.
All right. Bye.